Hey there, welcome to Dreamland Encounters, where I share stories of extraordinary experiences from beyond our everyday world. I'm Travis Morgan, and this story unfolds from my workplace, Kotner Auto, a small family-run shop on Columbus's east side. Working here since I was 22, I've grown from handling tires and oil to focusing on diagnostics and electrical work. Our shop sits quietly behind a strip mall near Mount Carmel with 4 simple bays and a fenced lot. It happened last October, near the month's end. A typical Wednesday evening with Dave gone and Mr. Sappearing, Ven's Dave gone and Mr. Sappearing such ex. Kotner already home. I was alone, which I often enjoy, those peaceful moments when the compressors stop and it's just me and my tools. In Bay 3, I was replacing a Ford Edge's rear wiring harness, likely damaged by possums or mice. Soft music played in the background. Suddenly, everything changed. The lights flickered. A brief, instant cutout. Lights, music, laptop all went dark for a split second before returning to normal. I checked the breaker panel, finding nothing unusual, though the outage felt different from our past electrical hiccups. Returning to my work, something extraordinary occurred. Every motion sensor in the lot triggered simultaneously. All floodlights blazed on at once, front drive, side alley, and fenced yard zones that normally operate independently. No single movement should activate all lights, yet here they were, simultaneously illuminating. I stepped outside. The air was crisp, my breath visible, but unnaturally still. No wind, no passing cars, just complete silence. The strip mall stood motionless. Pizza Hut 2 doors down sat dark and quiet. Standing in the lot center, I scanned my surroundings. Nothing moved. Bright light flooded the area, creating that strange flat coloration that distorts perception. Something was different. Something was watching. As night fell, I was outside near the shop when something unusual caught my attention overhead. 3 dim orange lights spread wide apart were gliding incredibly slowly from the west, just above the treetops. They moved with an eerie, heavy grace, as if connected to an unseen massive structure. Unlike any aircraft I'd encountered, these lights formed a perfect triangular shape, one leading, 2 behind, resembling a flat arrowhead. What struck me most was the complete absence of any connecting structure. No outline, no visible body, just 3 points moving in perfect synchronization, seemingly linked by an invisible force. Silent and steady, it crawled directly over the shop. I stood motionless, probably gaping as it passed. Its speed was remarkably slow, maybe 15 or 20 miles per hour, slower than any plane I'd ever seen. No wings, no body, nothing reflected, just 3 constant orange glowing points. A strange sensation pressed against my chest as it moved overhead. It wasn't fear exactly, but more like underwater pressure. Breathing became difficult for a few seconds, and my eyes watered slightly. Then it continued east, disappearing over the strip mall. After it vanished, I snapped out of my trance and rushed into the office to check the security footage. Camera by camera, I searched everywhere: front lot, back fence, alley, inside bays. Nothing but static lights and empty pavement. Even during the exact moment it passed overhead, the cameras showed absolutely nothing. Last December, right after the first big snow, I was doing my usual morning rounds on the family farm near Delaware, Ohio. While checking fences and equipment, I spotted something peculiar in an unharvested cornfield. About 50 feet of one row had its stalks bent at a perfect 90-degree angle right in the middle. They weren't broken or snapped, just precisely folded. This wasn't typical snow or wind damage. Animal tracks didn't explain it either. When something usually tramples a cornfield, you see broken stalks or crushed plants. But this looked intentional. I ran my hand along the stalks. They were stiff, but completely intact. The morning was calm, a light dusting of snow covering the field. Something felt off right away. The corn rows had an unusual bend, a strange shape I couldn't quite explain. I snapped a few photos on my phone, but they didn't capture the true oddity of the scene. That night, an unnatural silence settled in, the kind of quiet that makes your breath catch. No wind, no typical nighttime sounds. Around 11:30 p.m., a noise on the roof jolted me awake. Something was moving up there, deliberate, heavy steps. Not an animal scurrying, but something large moving with careful precision. 4 or 5 steps, then a pause. Then the same measured rhythm again. I lay completely still, listening. After several rounds, the noise stopped. Morning came, and I went outside to investigate. The roof looked untouched. Fresh snow lay smooth as glass, no footprints or marks on the shingles. I checked everywhere. The house, barn, shed, no tracks anywhere. The snow was pristine, as if nothing had disturbed it all night. Returning to the field, I took a closer look at the bent corn. Something caught my eye. The folded stalks weren't random. They formed a subtle repeating spiral shape, almost like a loose coil running the length of the row. It seemed deliberate, as if the corn was trying to point or communicate something. Running my fingers over the stalks, I could still feel a lingering coldness. Earlier, I'd noticed the field was intact like cardboard, sharply creased but not torn. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing else disturbed, just that one perfectly straight line of folded stalks. I tried to rationalize it, maybe uneven snow weight, but something felt off. Later that night, a triangle passed over the lot, no movement, just silent passage. I shut everything down and drove home, barely sleeping. I didn't tell anyone. It felt too strange to explain. A few nights later, I came in to check a missed parts delivery. The radio in Bay 2 was on, low volume, tuned to static. I hadn't used that radio in weeks. Everything else was untouched, doors locked, but that radio had definitely been off before. Since then, I've kept a big crank flashlight in my truck. No batteries. I don't trust power like I used to. Weeks later, I'm still thinking about what I saw that night. Dave Carter, a truck driver from Toledo with over 15 years on the road, experienced something inexplicable one spring evening while hauling a load from Cleveland to Indianapolis. Driving through northwest Ohio after dark, he pulled into a small, quiet rest area near Lima to take a break and have something to eat. For weeks, the cornfield had been a mystery. Every morning he'd check and find the stock folded in a precise spiral pattern that looked almost maintained, though he never saw anyone tending to it. The idea of setting up cameras crossed his mind, but he wasn't one for modern gadgets. Something about the situation felt like it was watching him just as intently as he was watching it. One afternoon, a movement near the tree line caught his eye. He initially thought it might be a deer or a stray dog, but whatever it was vanished into the woods without a sound. No rustling, no breaking branches, just gone. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination playing tricks. Then last week, something strange happened. While working in the barn, the power suddenly cut out across the entire area. Grabbing his flashlight, he stepped outside. The night sky was crystal clear, stars sharp and bright. In the distance beyond the trees, a faint glow emerged. This wasn't like typical town lights. It was a steady, soft blue reminiscent of police emergency lights. The glow lingered for about 5 minutes before disappearing completely, and the power restored just as abruptly. It felt like a message, though its meaning remained unclear. Now the corn's been harvested, and the field looks entirely normal. No bent stalks, no patterns, nothing. The snow has melted, leaving soft, muddy ground. But even now, when he's alone, he sometimes hears a quiet pacing on the roof, or catches a glimpse of that strange blue light through the trees. Each time, the hair on his arm stands up. He can't explain what happened in that field. He doesn't know if it was someone watching, something manipulating the landscape, or just his mind trying to make sense of these unexplained events. But one thing he's certain of, that perfect sharp spiral pattern wasn't a coincidence, and whatever moved across his roof that night left absolutely no trace behind. The wind farm's evening shift was typically uneventful. My job, maintaining 2 turbines spread across a few hundred acres near the Snake River, wasn't glamorous, just routine. In October, I'd switched to covering a co-worker's hours. Working from 2 p.m. to around 10 p.m. that week had been especially quiet, no storms, no wildlife issues. I was mostly logging numbers and running equipment, diagnostics. The roadside parking lot was eerie in its stillness. No distant traffic sounds, just complete silence. Scattered trucks and dim streetlights created a typical roadside scene. After shutting off my engine and stretching, I noticed something strange happening with my phone. Its battery was dropping rapidly, from 80% to 60% within minutes. The cold didn't seem a reasonable explanation. A soft, dim, orange glow caught my attention, hovering above the distant tree line. This wasn't like city lights or a sunset. It resembled a lantern suspended in invisible fog, completely motionless and hanging low in the sky. Not bright enough to cast shadows, but unmistakably present. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks on me. I wasn't drinking, just tired from a long day of driving. Curiosity led me to move around, and I discovered something bizarre. My phone's battery drained faster when I moved away from the truck. Stepping back inside, the battery drain stopped completely. When I tried starting the truck, nothing happened. Just a dead clicking sound, though the cab lights worked fine. I remained calm. I had jumper cables and could call for help if needed. I paced around, scanning the area with my flashlight. A few trucks in the distance had running engines, but no one was outside. That orange glow remained, seemingly waiting for something. After about 10 minutes, I tried the engine again. This time, it started immediately. As I prepared to leave, the glow vanished completely, as if it had never existed. My phone's battery returned to 78% and stabilized. Bewildered by the entire experience, I shook my head. Always carrying a standard Motorola handheld radio, I would typically check in with dispatch every couple of hours. But this night was different. Something unexplained had occurred in that silent, empty parking lot. During my night shift at the wind farm, I noticed something strange while walking the grounds. A rhythmic breathing sound came through my radio, lasting about 10 minutes before stopping. I didn't report it, assuming it was just random radio interference from a trucker or farm crew. The next night, near Turbine 2, the same thing happened again. What caught my attention was how the sound only appeared when I wasn't speaking. The moment I'd key the mic and talk, it would go silent. As soon as I stopped, the static returned. This time, the sound persisted longer. While walking around trying to understand its origin, I noticed something odd. The sound seemed to follow me, moving with my steps. The audio was too low to distinguish clearly, so I started recording it on the radio's voice memo function, mostly to prove to my supervisor that I wasn't imagining things. Back home, I transferred the recording to my laptop and listened through headphones. The first minute was just typical sounds, my footsteps, breathing, gravel crunching. Then the static began. Initially, I thought it was the same pulsing pattern I'd heard before. On Wednesday, while doing a loop around Turbine 9, I started picking up strange static. It wasn't full white noise, but little pulses and blips like catching a distant transmission. The sound was low and faint. I figured maybe highway patrol or a nearby farm was bleeding into our channels, which happens occasionally. I checked the signal strength. 2 bars, which seemed weird but not impossible. I spoke into the mic, a simple Unit 3 checking channel, but got no response. Just that same intermittent pulse. Switching channels didn't help. The static continued coming and going in bursts, sometimes 2 in a row. Later, as I pulled back onto the highway, my radio started crackling with static and faint voices like someone was trying to communicate from far away. It lasted only seconds before fading out. I adjusted the dial, but nothing else came through. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I kept watching the sky for that orange glow, but it never reappeared. At home, I fully charged my phone and checked its battery health. No issues. The truck started fine the next day too. I can't explain what happened, but I vividly remember that glow, how my phone drained, and how the truck wouldn't start until the strange phenomenon disappeared. All I wanted was to get home safe. Around 9:15, the static returned near Turbine 12. It was different this time, a continuous, unbroken hiss. The night started like any other during my 15 years of long-haul trucking. This was late March 2018. Somewhere in Nebraska, I was hauling fertilizer from South City down toward Colorado Springs, mostly following Route 83. The landscape was typical of those roads. Empty land, occasional gas stations with terrible coffee, and that stretch between North Platte and Marcook that feels impossibly remote. At first, the radio seemed normal. Then something changed. A hiss shifted pitch, almost like a Doppler effect, but without any movement. I looked around. No wind, no animals, nothing. I tapped the mic. Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there? Silence followed. After releasing the mic button, I heard another breath. This time, it was louder, coming directly through the speaker. Not a recording, but live. The sound wasn't mechanical, yet not quite human. It felt massive, like a lung the size of a furnace. I backed away from the turbine, scanning the road and field's edge. Visibility ended after just 10 feet. Nothing but empty scrub. No fences, no real trees, just sage, dirt, and distant hills. I switched the radio off, then back on. Complete silence. My last evening shift that week was supposed to be routine. I was covering for another guy helping close out the week. Near the battery bank on the south end, the radio suddenly came to life by itself. It jumped from channel 1 to 3, then 5, each time producing only static. Finally, it settled on channel 2, our primary channel. Earlier, when I first noticed the volume, I realized something was different. It wasn't just static. Beneath the noise was something else. Not exactly a voice, but breathing. Not my breathing. This was slower, deeper. One long drawn-out breath every 6 or 7 seconds. Inhale, hold, exhale. The static seemed to be constructed from the breath itself, not just surrounding it. Halfway through, I stopped the recording and sat in silence, listening to my house. Nothing seemed wrong, but something felt off. The next day, I brought the radio to the shop and asked my co-workers about interference. Derek, who also worked night shifts, hadn't noticed anything unusual. He joked about ham radio signals or military transmissions. I didn't mention the breathing. That night I switched to Channel 6, a frequency we rarely use. Night driving through open country can be eerily quiet. Long stretches of highway wind through nothing but fields and barbed wire, with no towns or truck stops for miles. When something goes wrong out here, you're completely on your own. I've driven this road countless times, but one particular night was different. Just past 9 p.m., around mile marker 211, I noticed an odd sound on the CB radio. I wasn't talking to anyone, just had it on low like always. A mechanical clicking noise emerged. Fast, precise, like a typewriter. Not static, not Morse code, just steady, rhythmic clicks cycling evenly. Adjusting the squelch didn't help. The sound persisted across all channels, almost embedded in the signal itself. I scanned the landscape, nothing but open fields under a clear sky. Then I saw it, a star that wasn't quite behaving like the others. At first, I thought it was a windshield smudge. Tapping and wiping changed nothing. Every time the clicking hit a specific rhythm, 3 quick beats, then one slow, the star would shift slightly left, maybe an inch from an outstretched hand's perspective. I killed the CB. The clicking stopped, but the star kept moving. Driving at 65, I watched it remain sharp and white, twitching periodically. Past marker 213, it stopped moving. The sky returned to normal. The next night, curiosity drew me back northbound. Around 9:20 p.m., the pattern repeated exactly. Approaching marker 213, the clicking started. That same bright star sat motionless until the rhythm triggered its slight leftward movement. I tried calling out on the CB, hoping someone else was nearby. Silence. No response, not even the usual squelch feedback. Once I crossed marker 211, everything went quiet again. I started timing its behavior, making sure to pass through this specific stretch of road around the same time over the next few nights. Then I heard something strange. My own voice from the previous day. The recording played exactly as it happened before. Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there? Followed by that same pause and breath. I shut everything off and drove back to the shop, skipping the usual checklist. The next week I grabbed a new radio unit without explanation. The old one likely remains in the drawer. Since then, nothing unusual has occurred. No static, no mysterious voices. I still have the recording on my laptop, but I haven't played it again. Late July, a Thursday evening. I was walking Casey, my black lab mix, around the block before darkness fell. Our neighborhood outside Missoula was quiet, but typical Montana. Chain-link fences, gravel driveways, porch lights flickering on and off. The day had been scorching, one of those dry heat waves where asphalt gets tacky and pine sap bakes on tree bark. At 8:30, the air still felt like standing next to an open oven. Casey seemed unbothered. Driving became a series of strange encounters between mile markers 211 and 213. One particularly windy night, moonlight revealed rippling grain fields beneath me. Suddenly, everything went eerily quiet. The wind vanished completely. No sound from the rig, no road vibration, just silence and strange clicks. Something peculiar caught my attention. When the star shifted, my interior dome light flickered briefly. A single subtle pulse like a momentary voltage drop. Gauges remained steady, the engine ran smoothly, but the light definitely dimmed for an instant. I kept both hands on the wheel, avoiding the CB. The clicking continued softly, feeling almost like a scheduled check-in. Over the next month, I drove through that stretch 4 more times. Each time, the same pattern repeated precisely, only between markers 211 and 213, only between 9:10 and 9:40 p.m. Once, I pulled over at mile marker 212 and idled with the CB on. The clicking grew more intense, not louder, but more present, as if creeping closer to my consciousness. The star moved again, pulsing slightly brighter for half a second. My dome light flickered in sync. Then came that distinct smell of hot copper and ozone, a scent I'd only encountered once before after an inverter fried in an old cab. I immediately threw the truck in gear and kept moving. Afterward, I avoided that route, telling dispatch I preferred going west through Ogallala. It cost me extra hours, but I didn't care. My last drive through that section was in January 20, just before quitting the row. Snow lined the shoulders and a full moon illuminated a clear sky. I'd almost forgotten about the previous encounters when suddenly around 9:15, the CV popped once. No clicking, just a single pop and complete silence. When I looked up, the star had already shifted, seeming to have been watching ahead of schedule. Casey and I were midway down Morgan Street on our usual walk when things took an unexpected turn. The air around me suddenly transformed, my breath emerging as white fog despite the warm day. I stopped, took another breath, and watched the same clear puff hover in the air. Casey seemed unaffected, still intently investigating a mailbox post, as if searching for hidden secrets. Something was wrong. An intense cold struck my chest without warning, like stepping into a massive industrial freezer. No gradual cooling, just an instant temperature drop. Goosebumps spread across my arms, and I tugged Casey's leash, urging her forward. She hesitated, sniffed the air, then continued walking. With each step, the temperature plummeted. My ears stung, my nose ran. To my right, a small metal fence post was rapidly developing a crusty silver frost, spreading like time-lapse photography. I stared, blinking in disbelief, and almost reached out before stopping an inch away. This wasn't just cool evening air. This was dead of winter freezing. Casey's behavior changed. She growled softly but steadily, standing stiff with ears pulled back and tail lowered. Suddenly, she barked sharply and spun around on the sidewalk, lunging so hard that I stumbled. The leash wrapped tightly around my wrist, and I gripped it firmly. Then, just as quickly as it began, the cold vanished. One moment, my breath was foggy and my teeth were chattering. The next, it was back to the sticky, dry heat of the day. No fog, no frost, and mysteriously, no leash. I swear it. Heart hammering, with arms feeling like they'd been plunged into ice water, I ran after Casey. She bolted down the street, tail tucked and moving in that panicked, half-hunched way dogs do when terrified. Though my fingers were still clenched as if holding something, the leash had completely disappeared. 3 blocks later, she was scratching frantically at our front door. My hands shook as I unlocked it, and she immediately darted inside, hiding under the table. Standing on the porch and catching my breath, everything looked normal. Crickets chirped, porch lights glowed, sprinklers cast misty light, but something felt off. The street was too still, too clean, almost like a perfectly staged scene. I've been into amateur astronomy since college, often spending nights tracking satellites or watching for meteorites. One particular evening in Maple Ridge, a small Ohio town, I set up my Celestron Nexstar behind the old high school baseball field around 9:15. This spot offered minimal light pollution, and the janitor was always accommodating, not minding my presence as long as I cleaned up afterwards. The night was crisp, temperatures hovering in the mid-40s with a gentle western breeze. About 40 minutes into my observation, something unusual caught my eye. A formation of lights approached from the northeast, hovering around 30 DD above the horizon. Initially, I assumed it was a military night exercise, given our proximity to Patterson. 6 lights moved in a V formation, reminiscent of geese in flight. 5 of them blinked like typical aircraft, but the 6th light at the back right remained constant, white and unwavering. Something felt different. I could hear a low, distant engine hum, yet strangely, the unblinking light produced no sound at all. Intrigued, I checked my phone's flight radar app. Nothing appeared in that direction, not even the blinking lights. Using my telescope, I zoomed in. The 5 blinking lights revealed faint outlines. Wings, tail fins, heat shimmer, definitely jets, likely F-16s. But the 6th light was something else entirely. Days later, the strange incident with my dog Casey added another layer of mystery. We were walking our usual route when an inexplicable coldness enveloped us. Casey became visibly distressed, refusing to go near a specific fence post. After hiding near some water for 10 minutes, she emerged clingy and wary. When I checked my wrist, there were no marks from her leash, no rope burn, no redness, as if the restraint had never existed. That night, I retraced our walking path. The fence post looked unchanged, metal still warm from the day's heat. Dry, scratchy grass surrounded the area. The next morning, I discovered the short leash was missing. I searched everywhere, laundry room, couch cushions, car trunk, finding nothing. Even a daylight street walk revealed no trace. I knew I hadn't dropped it. I'd felt it on my wrist when it vanished. We skipped walks for a couple of days. When I bought a replacement, same brand and length, it felt strange in my hand. Casey seemed mostly fine, occasionally barking at dark windows. A habit she'd always had, I've never experienced that bone-chilling coldness again. Not so suddenly or deeply. A perfect solid sphere, no structure, no discernible shape. Later, those moments would replay endlessly in my mind. Small questions haunted me. What if I'd crossed the street differently? What if Casey hadn't been on a leash? The cold sensation swept through me quickly, yet something about that space felt permanently altered. Now we crossed that block without thinking. The Leitnin never reappeared. The air still moves differently there. During that night, I watched an unusual light among 6 jets, about the same size as the others, but something felt distinctly off. While 5 jets flew in a tight V formation, this one drifted slightly, veering about 5 dag to the right before correcting itself. No blinking, no sound, no tracker signal. The jets rumbled low across the sky before fading west. But this unblinking light stopped right over the field, as the others continued their path, vanishing behind the tree line without a backward glance. Through my telescope, I locked onto a pure white sphere, solid and unmoving. No outline, no shadow. Unlike stars that shimmer in the atmosphere, this remained perfectly still. For a full minute, I watched in silence. Then, without warning, it moved straight up. Not an arc, not gradual acceleration, just an immediate vertical climb, like a cursor being dragged upward on a screen. Smooth, precise. It rose to about twice its original height and stopped again. A slight tremor ran through me. Not panic, but that unsettling feeling when something defies explanation. I've tracked satellites, watched the ISS countless times. This was different. Stepping back from the telescope, I observed with naked eyes. The light was dimmer now, higher up, but still that steady white. Then it blinked. 1 full second of brightness, then gone. I waited. Nothing. The wind picked up, rustling dry leaves across the field. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Another blink, another second-long flash, slightly higher than before. I sensed it was still climbing. The transition was jarring. Dark sky to bright light in an instant. No flare, no fade, like switching between frames. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I packed up quickly, my mind racing. Late September last year, I had just moved into my quiet apartment in Salem, Massachusetts, still processing what I'd witnessed. I moved into an older apartment on a quiet side street near downtown. Nothing special, just affordable and convenient. The first few weeks felt routine. I settled in, unpacked, and established my normal rhythms. My place had 2 big windows facing the street, one in the living room, one in the bedroom. A street lamp outside cast a yellowish glow at night, and I noticed how dark the room's corners remained, even with lights on. The first encounter happened casually enough. I was lying on the couch, scrolling through my phone when something caught my attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow beyond the living room window. Not a person or tree, but a dark, shapeless form, like a smudge. When I turned to look directly, it vanished. Over the next week, these glimpses continued, always in room corners or just outside windows. The shape had no clear edges, just a dark form hovering as if watching from a distance. I tried rationalizing it away, blaming work stress and exhaustion. But the feeling grew heavier. About a week after moving in, everything changed. While making dinner in the kitchen, I saw the shape again, this time between the living room and hallway. After that night, my life shifted dramatically. I go out much less now. Where I used to set up my equipment 3 or 4 times a week, now it's maybe once or twice a month. I haven't told anyone in town. It's the kind of place where people discuss lawnmowers, and I'm already known as the space guy. I don't need to be labeled the crazy one, too. After that night, I checked satellite logs. Nothing had passed overhead in that window. No weather balloons, no military flight notices. I stood still, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. It had faded away like smoke, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. At first, I tried convincing myself it was just a trick of light or shadow from the street lamp, but the way it vanished wasn't normal. No flicker, no gradual fade, just gone in an instant. Occasional whispers and soft rustling sounds would drift through the apartment when everything else was completely silent. I tossed everything into the Jeep and left, knowing I'd never look at flight formations the same way again. The feeling of being watched had become a constant companion. Every late afternoon or evening, a strange shape would appear just at the edge of my vision, never fully visible, never close enough to confront. I tried everything to make it stop. Changing lighting, closing curtains, turning on lamps, nothing worked. My phone started acting weird too. Apps would freeze near the windows, the screen would flicker, or the camera would fail to open. One night, I attempted to photograph the shape outside, but the camera only showed static. I deleted the picture, assuming it was just a technical glitch. I mentioned these experiences to Clara during one of her visits, but her joking comment about ghosts didn't help. We quickly changed the subject. The encounters grew more frequent, sometimes happening twice a day. The most unsettling moment came while getting ready for bed. As I passed the bedroom window, I saw it standing in the shadows under the tree, darker than the night itself, like a silhouette that absorbed light. It remained completely still. When I blinked, it disappeared. Online research into the building's history yielded nothing unusual, no strange reports, no odd stories from previous tenants. The neighbors were friendly but kept to themselves, and no one ever mentioned anything out of the ordinary. That weekend, I spent the entire day at home trying to distract myself. As evening fell, I sat in the living room with only a small lamp providing light. The presence returned, but this time felt different. Instead of fading quickly, the shape seemed to linger, like it was waiting, holding steady just at the edge of my vision. When I looked directly, it didn't immediately vanish. I sat motionless, staring, my heart racing. The air felt heavy and cold, like a weight pressing down on me. My arms prickled with goosebumps. After what seemed like a minute, the shape dissolved, drifting away like smoke in a gentle breeze. I started keeping a journal to track these encounters. They always happened in the late afternoon or evening, never in the morning. No clear pattern emerged, but the constant feeling of being watched never left me. I tried talking to people, hoping someone could explain what I was experiencing. Their suggestions of sleep paralysis or strange lighting never quite fit. One night, the shape appeared outside my bedroom window, this time at the edge of the yard. I cracked the window open. Darkness enveloped my living room as I wrapped up a frozen pizza, the lights flickering before vanishing completely. Another typical power outage in Fairbanks, I thought. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside to investigate the pitch-black street. Moonlight peeked through thin clouds, casting a faint glow over the silent neighborhood. No street lights, no headlights. Just the usual stillness that descends when the city goes quiet. Then something caught my eye, a bright, perfectly spherical light hovering about 30 feet above the road in front of my house. This wasn't a typical light. A steady white-blue glow seemed to breathe life into the darkness below. Initially, I suspected a drone or a neighbor's spotlight, but everything remained dark and silent. No drone hum, no engines, not even the familiar buzz of electricity, just this motionless, silent light. I pulled on my jacket and stepped onto the porch, flashlight and phone in hand. Attempting to call someone, I realized there was no signal. Only wind rustling through trees broke the silence. The next morning, broken branches were scattered beneath the window. No footprints, no other signs of disturbance. Exhaustion began consuming me. My doctor said I was fine, but I felt drained. I tried everything: new curtains, bright daylight bulbs, rearranging furniture. Nothing stopped the shape from appearing. Then one evening, everything changed. I came home and searched every corner, every window. The shape was gone. For the first time in weeks, relief washed over me. That night, I slept with windows open and lights off. The air felt fresh and clean. At 3 a.m., a soft tapping woke me. My heart raced as I sat up but saw nothing, just an empty street and quiet trees. Since then, the shape appears less frequently. Sometimes I catch a fleeting glimpse in my peripheral vision, but it doesn't stay. The feeling of being watched has diminished. I still don't understand what it was or why it was there. It never attempted to harm me or communicate. It simply watched and faded away. As a local through and through, used to the cold, long nights and unexpected moments of Fairbanks, I've learned to accept these mysteries. The night was cold and still on the tundra near the Brooks Range. I'm Gabe Carlson, a field tech with the Arctic Wildlife Study Team, and we were tracking caribou and testing remote sensors. It was my first late spring expedition when the ice begins to thin but nights remain long and frigid. That evening, I sat outside our tent cluster, sipping coffee from my thermos, while the rest of the team wound down inside. The sky was clear, stars bright but distant. Not a breath of wind stirred the landscape. As I gazed over the snow, something caught my eye, a low, bright object hovering about 50 feet from camp. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd seen before. It was a steady, unnaturally white glow, brighter than a flashlight, but without the harsh beam. The light illuminated the snow around it with an even, almost ethereal quality. Suddenly, the porch light went out. Nearby electronics died completely, creating an eerie silence different from a typical blackout. Curiosity drove me to shine my flashlight at the orb. It didn't respond normally, but shifted slightly left, almost as if acknowledging my presence. My digital watch stopped ticking. I backed onto the lawn, transfixed by its glow. After what seemed like 5 minutes, though time felt distorted, the orb began to fade slowly. The power remained out for a solid half hour after the light disappeared. When electricity finally returned, everything snapped back to life. The microwave clock reset, my phone signal restored, and even the car key fob beeped normally. I stood on the porch, completely silent, feeling like I'd witnessed something impossible. No fireflies, drones, or planes, just that glowing sphere, quiet and mysterious. The next day in town, I shared my experience. Most people smiled and suggested it was probably a weather balloon or military test, but their explanations couldn't account for the complete electronic shutdown. To this day, I've never seen anything like it again. That night on the tundra remains an unexplained mystery, etched into my memory with its strange, otherworldly light. The night was silent, with an unusual stillness that made the air feel tight. A light appeared, so perfectly motionless it seemed to pause the world around me. At first I thought it might be a satellite tracker, but those don't emit light. It wasn't a campfire either. We were completely alone out there. When I called out to the others, I realized the camp was dark and quiet. Everyone should have been inside, but something felt off. I checked my watch, 1:13 a.m. Suddenly, the light vanished like someone had flipped a switch. No response came when I called again. Walking back toward the tents, my head grew fuzzy. The air felt thick, my thoughts sluggish. I stumbled, trying to clear my head. Inside the tent, the team looked shocked. They said I'd been gone almost 2 hours, which made no sense to me. I was certain only 10 minutes had passed. My watch was dead, frozen at 1:13. The others' watches had stopped at exactly the same moment. Outside, a perfect 10-foot circle of crushed snow marked where the light had been. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, just an unnaturally flat ring in the untouched landscape. We all felt strange afterward. Jessie, our biologist, said she felt like she'd been dreaming, but couldn't remember anything. Nobody could explain the synchronized watch stoppage. We watched the spot for the next day, but nothing happened. The strange circle remained as snow slowly settled around it. We packed up and headed back to Purdue Bay, the incident lingering in our minds. Even now, I can't explain what occurred. The tundra's long, silent nights feel different to me now. Sometimes in Anchorage, I catch myself staring at my watch, wondering about that moment of unexplained stillness. I've been a fire lookout since childhood, following my family's tradition, but this experience changed everything. The weirdest part was how silent it was. No hum, no buzz, nothing. Just a strange light that seemed to exist between reality and something else entirely. Sometimes when the power flickers or the night gets extra quiet, I find myself looking up, wondering if that light's still out there, just watching. My name is Jake Merrick, and that summer I was continuing a long-standing family tradition of fire watching near Denali. Perched in an old wooden tower on a ridge with a sweeping wilderness view, my job was simple: scan for fires, report any danger, and fill the quiet hours with reading or napping. Late July was different. Something unusual began just after midnight on the second night. While scanning the dark horizon with binoculars, strange lights caught my attention. These weren't typical aircraft lights. No blinking red or green markers, just steady pale glows with a faint blue tint. They moved smoothly across the sky, almost floating in an inexplicable pattern, clustering and spacing out like they were methodically patrolling a route. Communication became impossible. My radio produced only crackling static, and the backup handheld emitted a low, humming buzz. Each night, the same pattern repeated. Attempts to photograph the lights resulted in fuzzy, indistinct blobs. The nearby dogs behaved strangely. Their barking was different, low and growly, not the typical alert sound. It felt like they sensed something unnatural lurking just beyond perception. I began tracking everything meticulously, logging interference times and noting the lights' precise movements. They always drifted low over the tree line, moving west to east before vanishing with the sunrise. Midweek, everything changed during a routine walk to the helipad. Behind the trees, a shape caught my eye. Tall, slender, absolutely still, but watching. The air around it shimmered like a heat mirage. When I called out, nothing responded. My flashlight revealed only empty space when I swept the beam across where the figure had been. Initially, I assumed some weird atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction. Days passed, and the mysterious lights continued their strange dance across the night sky. Something was happening, but I couldn't explain what. The tower seemed isolated every night, disconnected from the world between midnight and dawn. Maybe there are moments missing that I'll never get back. The forest hung silent around me, punctuated by an unshakable feeling of being watched. Something wasn't right. Each night, strange lights drifted through the sky in a predictable pattern, accompanied by persistent radio interference that blocked all communication. Hours seemed to compress into moments. My watch showed nearly an hour passing in what felt like minutes. The deep stillness suspended time itself, with no wind or insects breaking the eerie quiet. When the lights finally faded into the grey dawn, I felt disoriented. At the nearby cabin, I used the landline to contact the ranger station. Their response was dismissive. No reports of unusual activity, just suggestions of bad weather or poor reception. But I knew what I'd experienced. Night after night, these unexplained phenomena seemed to target me specifically, as if I were the sole witness to something extraordinary. On the final night of my vigil, I remained awake until dawn, determined to understand the mystery. The lights returned, hovering above the tower. One orb pulsed faintly, almost breathing, while distant dogs barked a soft, steady rhythm. The radio hummed with static. Then, unexpectedly, everything changed. A soft, almost musical hum vibrated through the air. The radio crackled to life for a split second, and I heard a voice calling my name. I reached for the mic, but the connection vanished as quickly as it appeared. Morning arrived with the forest's typical sounds: birds calling, wind rustling through trees. The world reset, making the night's events feel like nothing more than a bad dream. I packed up and left the tower, returning to town, where everything felt louder and more mundane. Yet the memories remained, a persistent whisper of something inexplicable. The old quarry's ridge framed a bruised purple sunset, matching the eerie color local rumors associated with strange lights. I was working a quiet shift at Black Rock Cafe, half listening to stories that normally meant nothing to me. That changed when John, a customer, leaned in and started talking about Miller's Pit. His description was precise. Orange spheres hovering silently over a blasted rock face, at least 15 feet wide, blinking out as suddenly as they appeared. I continued steaming milk for his espresso, nodding mechanically, while the cafe maintained its usual low-energy atmosphere. Everything shifted when the door chimed. A man in a crisp black suit, no tie, walked in with gleaming shoes. His entrance was methodical, scanning the room without making eye contact, bypassing the counter, and heading directly to John's table. As he sat down, the fluorescent lights seemed to dim slightly. The stranger's approach was direct. Without greeting or identification, he placed his hands flat on the table and asked in a mechanical tone, "Tell me about the lights." John hesitated, then stammered about orange lights, describing back roads, gravel cut-offs, and abandoned cabins. The man listened intently, nodding once after John finished speaking. My heart raced as I watched from behind the counter, half expecting the stranger to vanish. When John finished his drink, he pushed back his chair. "I've got to go," he said. The man in black responded with an unnervingly flat, "Be safe." John gave me a small, cryptic wave before hurrying out. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from him. When I looked up, the booth was empty. The suited man had disappeared without a trace, leaving only a faint scent behind. The unnatural silence, fleeting shapes, and strange lights continued to haunt me. I couldn't explain what I'd witnessed, and no one else seemed to have seen it. Perhaps that was the most unsettling part. Some experiences in the wild are meant to be observed quietly from a distance, never fully understood. I drove home on Route 47, windows down despite the chill, the smell of cinnamon and espresso lingering. Darkness enveloped the silent quarry to my right, with only a distant street lamp breaking the night's stillness. The gravel access road tempted me, but I resisted the urge to chase ghost stories. At home, I illuminated every room, checking my phone. John's text sat alone, making me wonder about his recent experiences. The laptop's fan clicked mechanically in the quiet, almost too loud. I hesitated to text him, unsure what words would capture my concern. Steam curled from my tea at the kitchen table. Soft headlights passed outside, and for a moment a dark shape caught my eye. Just the neighbor's cat. I realized, my racing heart settling. The local news site showed nothing unusual: municipal meetings, a high school band story, a missing cat. No mentions of strange encounters or secret meetings. Sleep became a battle. The alarm clock mocked me. 10:03 a.m., then 1:19. Every house creak sounded like footsteps on gravel. I lay awake until 3:30, half expecting someone to knock. Morning light felt weak and pale. Coffee brewing, I stared at the empty street. The thought of calling John flickered through my mind, Had he seen the man again? Seen those strange lights? But I didn't call. Instead, I poured coffee with too much cream, making it sweet. At 7:15, I left for my shift, taking the route past the quarry. Headlights cut through misty pine trees. No glow. No sign of anyone near the cut line. In the cafe parking lot, I stilled myself before entering. The door chime rang as I set down my keys, forcing a smile for the morning rush. Regulars sat at the counter. No suits, no staring. The neon sign flickered as the last customer left. Walking to the parking lot under a bruised sky, I half expected to see the mysterious man leaning against my car. Nothing. Just John's Prius wrapped in fog. The neon sign hummed back to life. Espresso machine hissing. I wiped the bar top, beans dropping into the grinder. I handed Marisol a cappuccino. She studied my face. You okay? You look tired? I locked up the coffee shop at 9:15, the night settling around me like a quiet blanket. Stars hung steady overhead, clear and distant. My reflection in the car window showed dark eyes and a pale face, an unresolved question lingering just beneath the surface. The morning at the White Sands test range unfolded in muted grays. As a freelance aerospace journalist who'd been chasing missile launches for 2 years, I was used to early mornings and tense anticipation. My DSLR set ready, and I'd camped overnight in my car near the observation bunker. At 6:02 a.m., the alert horn cut through the thick, low-hanging clouds. I framed the launch pad through the bunker's narrow window, catching the bright flash as the missile erupted skyward. Its contrail sliced through the overcast sky like a white ribbon, jet noise deep and roaring before fading to a distant whine. As the sound dissipated, something caught my eye. A lone figure stood backlit by floodlights near the service road, shoulders squared with an unsettling precision. This wasn't standard. No safety gear, just a dark suit that seemed bizarrely out of place against the desolate landscape. I'd been tracking a similar figure earlier, barely visible, motionless near the perimeter fence. When I zoomed in and moved to investigate, the test crew had vanished, leaving only gravel and scattered parachute fragments. No trace remained. Circling the area, I found nothing. No footprints, no crushed grass, nothing to confirm what I'd seen. My heart raced as I clicked the radio. Range control. This is Jensen. Do you have an observer at the south fence? Silence answered. Just as I turned to walk back, a soft click broke the quiet. I spun around, suddenly alert. The memory felt like a silent agreement, something seen, something unspoken. Just another long night blending into an uncertain morning. The flood lamp cast an unnatural glow, revealing a man in a black suit so crisp it seemed impossible. White shirt, narrow tie, shoes gleaming with an almost mechanical polish. His posture defied human flexibility, perfectly rigid, like a mannequin carefully positioned. Man, he said with unsettling calm, this area is off limits. I lifted my press badge. Defense Tech Weekly, I have permission for photos. He shook his head. No emotion crossed his strange face, yet it wasn't unfriendly. Permission revoked. Return to the bunker. I glanced at the clock. 6:15. 10 minutes felt like hours. I remembered seeing someone earlier, a dark suit at the fence. Did you see someone? I asked. He checked his watch. No, please step away. Raising my camera, I hoped for a quote. A slight smile flickered across his lips as he shook his head. Something made the hair on my arms prickle. I lowered the camera and stepped back. He nodded, then glided, not walked, into the shadows behind the service road. No sound from his shoes. I watched until he vanished completely. Returning to the bunker, my mind raced. The test crew was gone. Vans pulled away, the door locked, completely empty. At 7 a.m., I drove to the main gate. The security guard looked puzzled when I showed my pass. You must have missed the memo, he said. I insisted there was no memo. He shrugged and punched in the gate code. On the highway, I reviewed the photos. Missile blasts cut bright arcs through the cloud cover. But something caught my eye, a dark blur in every fence line shot. A shape like a stand-in figure, and gone. I zoomed in. The blur had fabric-like edges, no discernible detail, disappearing in the next frame. At 8:15, I called my editor, voice trembling as I described the man in black. She explained the range was locked down for hypersonic tests, meaning sensitive photos would be scrubbed. When I asked about the suited man, she told me to run the launch pictures and file the rest. In a diner half a mile from the base, I stirred my coffee. Through the windows, I scanned the highway and scrubbed pines, half expecting to see him standing there. Nothing. Leaving my card with the waitress, I walked to my car. A sealed manila envelope lay on the passenger seat. stamped with the date 612. An unmarked envelope arrived without a return address. Inside, two closely cropped prints from my fence-line photos and a single slip of paper were enclosed. No context accompanied the images. I folded everything, stashed it in the glove box, and continued driving home, feeling as if I'd just surfaced from a hazy dream. Dawn stretched before me, yellow highway lines blurring into the distance. I half expected to see that dark figure in my rearview mirror, ramrod straight, dressed in black, staring unblinkingly, but he never materialized. Just before sunrise, I stepped out of the cabin. Pale slate-blue sky hung low over pine trees, with clouds nestled just above the tree line. Baxter, my mutt, trotted alongside me, ears pricked for any wildlife movement. I'd walked this 2-mile national forest loop near Cedar Creek countless times, but something felt different this morning. The air hung heavy with moisture, as if rain had fallen overnight, and an unnatural silence blanketed the forest. We reached a fork near a small brook. Baxter splashed through shallow water while I wrung out my shirt sleeve and took a drink. Then I noticed it. A break in the familiar landscape. A clearing previously unseen, tucked just off the trail. Wet ground squelched under my boots as I pushed through branches. I emerged into a space about 20 feet across. 6 mature oaks and maples encircled me, each tree trunk bearing an identical, chilling mark. From ground level to exactly 6 feet high, every tree's bark had been stripped away with impossible precision. The exposed wood looked smooth and pale, almost surgically shaved clean. No rough edges, no bark fragments littered the ground, just perfect horizontal lines encircling each trunk. Baxter hung back at the clearing's edge, hackles raised and visibly distressed. I approached the nearest oak, running a finger along its surface, cool and unnaturally smooth, with no tool marks or signs of cutting. No rational explanation came to mind. A chill traced my spine as I scanned the area. No footprints marred the mud. No broken branches suggested human intervention. My flashlight beam swept across untouched fallen leaves. Something felt profoundly wrong, Baxter whimpered, refusing to enter the circle, shaking his head as if the ground were burning. Realizing I had no phone signal, I switched off the device. Circling the clearing, I confirmed the stripped height was exactly the same on each tree, deliberate and utterly unnatural. I huddled in the cabin, Baxter pressed close, his fur damp against my trembling body. The night before haunted me, that strange clearing in the forest, the perfectly stripped bark, the eerie stillness that defied explanation. I clutched a warm tea, my chilled fingers tracing the mug's rim as I stared out the window, fog weaving between distant tree trunks. Earlier, something had felt wrong. No wind stirred the branches, yet they seemed to wave through low clouds. The silence was absolute. No birds, no distant brook, nothing. An overwhelming sensation of being watched had crawled over me. I'd memorized the crisp edge of that stripped bark, then hurried back to the trail, leaves crunching underfoot as normal sounds gradually returned. I texted Aaron, my forestry friend. Ever heard of bark stripping like this? Perfect bands, no tracks, no damage, no response came. Night deepened, and I kept the curtains drawn, repeatedly checking locks. Baxter shadowed me, his nose twitching at unseen corners. A voicemail to the ranger station went unanswered. Dreams invaded my sleep trees with smooth white bands bending, stepping closer on invisible roots. Baxter's whimper woke me, climbing onto the bed and watching the darkness with alert eyes. Morning brought a different scene. With notebook and tape measure, I returned to the clearing. Sunrise cut through lingering fog, but the light band had vanished. A thin, papery bark now covered the wood, scabby and irregular. The 6 feet mark, barely visible, worn by night's moisture. Light-colored flakes clung to roots, disintegrating at my touch. I documented everything, noting how leaves looked subtly changed, edges curled, colors paler near the tree line. Baxter refused to enter the clearing center just as before. I took photos, marked GPS coordinates, and backed away. The forest resumed its rhythm, birds singing, breeze rustling. At home, sorting through images, I noticed something odd. My phone's first set showed dark trunks. The clearing's ring remained solid brown. Something was different, but what? The night stretched endlessly across eastern Colorado, Highway 50 a dark ribbon cutting through grassland and scattered scrub oaks. My car's engine hummed steadily at 65, windows cracked open. It was late August, around 1:45 a.m. With the air crisp at about 55 degrees, something felt different. The stars hung motionless against the navy sky, pinned like a frozen photograph. I'd been counting constellations, searching for Orion's belt, but something was off. I'd driven maybe 20 miles, yet the stars hadn't shifted. Cassiopeia's familiar curve remained fixed, the Big Dipper unchanged. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I'd dozed off, but nothing moved. Slowing to 50, I watched roadside markers slide past. The horizon should have been shifting relative to the stars. Instead, everything remained locked in place, like a static image behind my windshield. My heart raced. I keyed the CB mic on channel 19. Anybody out there? Static was my only response. The hissing filled the car's silence. Weeks earlier, a hiking trail with Baxter had left me unsettled. One photo from that day stood out, Baxter sniffing near some cut tree edges, with a faint out-of-focus swirl in the top right corner. Zooming in revealed nothing. No shape, no color, just a blur invisible in the live view. I've returned to that trail twice since. Each time, the ground looked normal. No 6-foot rings, no bark fragments, no odd fog patches. Baxter stayed close, ears forward, sniffing branches without whining. The photos remain on my desk. Sometimes I study the close-up of Baxter in the clearing, staring at that faint sky swirl. I still don't know what stripped those trees or why Baxter refused to cross that line. I can't explain why the bark seemed to regrow overnight. But I remember the hush of that circle, how the air bent around it, and how I fled without casting a single fishing line into my morning calm. I gripped the wheel, driving another 5 miles, trying to shake off my growing unease. Then I pulled back onto the highway after backing slowly off the turnout, watching the puddle's reflection in the rear view as stars traced their arc. The weekend began like any other camping trip. Alina and I had driven deep into the Cascades, seeking silence away from the constant buzz of technology. Early September offered that perfect transition between summer's warmth and fall's crisp edge. We'd found a secluded clearing surrounded by towering fir and cedar trees, their branches weaving a dense canopy that sheltered us. I had pulled over at a turnout just past milepost 213, killed the engine, and turned off the headlights. The road was deserted without even a guardrail, just gravel and a shallow drainage ditch. Darkness had dropped so thick it felt like velvet. My phone showed no signal when I checked. A cold breeze drifted across the plains, rustling the grass. I stared upward, leaning against the hood. The stars flickered bright in the silent air, punctuated only by distant crickets and the lingering echo of my idling engine. Every celestial fixture stayed exactly where it had been. I waited 1 minute, then 2. The thought of turning around crossed my mind, but I felt too uncertain to move. I needed to see something else. Overnight rain had filled the shallow ditch with a couple inches of water, where I'd left my floor mat to air dry. I shone my phone's flashlight on the water. The stars were mirrored there. Yes, but they moved. I watched the puddle's reflection shift slowly, almost imperceptibly. I pressed a fingertip to the water's surface, and a ripple erased part of the reflection. When the water calmed, the reflected stars reformed in new positions farther along their path. My breath caught. Both images, real and puddle, remained in perfect focus. The reflected stars marched against the still backdrop of the actual stars. 3 stars of Orion slid westward across the mirror surface at the pace I expected them to cross the real sky, but the actual sky stayed fixed. I backed away from the puddle, feeling a weight in my chest and a sense of nausea. I slapped my sleeve and blinked, but it was real. The sky and its inverted twin were decoupled. One stood motionless, while the other moved on its own schedule. I scanned the horizon, seeing no lights or shapes, just a silent prairie under a frozen sky. When I opened my eyes, the real sky remained as steady as a photograph. Every time I closed my eyes, the internal image of moving stars hovered in my mind. The first cranked when I stepped back into the car and locked the doors. As the late September lights softened, Elena and I settled into our campsite in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. We'd taken a few days off work to explore a less-traveled trail, setting up our tent with practiced ease. The forest seemed to pause around us, holding its breath in an unusual stillness. While Elena unpacked the cooler, I gathered firewood. Our movements were unhurried, comfortable. Sausages sizzled over the fire, and hot cocoa warmed our hands as darkness crept in. Flames danced, casting shadows across the ground and tree bases. We sat close, backs against cool tree trunks, Elena absently poking the fire with a stick and humming softly. That's when it happened. A whisper, just my name Jason, soft and clear, carried on the faintest breeze from somewhere beyond the tree line, maybe 50 feet away. No echo, no repetition. I looked at Elena, who had gone suddenly still. When I asked if she heard it, she nodded silently. We scanned the shadows between the trees, seeing nothing. No movement, no glowing eyes, just impenetrable darkness. We called out, thinking perhaps another camper was nearby. Silence answered us. Then it happened again. The drive home felt surreal. Headlights cut through darkness, the engine's steady hum a comfort. My phone found a single bar of signal around milepost 208. By the time I reached Lemon, the sky was changing. Stars that had seemed fixed were now creeping westward. I pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot. Engine idling. The earlier puddle reflection was gone, replaced by dry gravel. As dawn approached, I drove home in silence. Pulling into my driveway, I sat in the pastel light, wondering about the boundary between reality and something else. We'd been in those woods for almost 3 hours when everything began to shift. I'm Emma Collins, and I usually spend my weekends on trails, especially in the fall when the leaves turn. This time was different. Something in the woods had whispered my name, and Elena had heard it too. It was a typical morning hike near Franconia Notch State Park. Cool autumn air hung lightly, and sunlight dappled through the treetops. My boots crunched on dry leaves as I walked the 3-mile loop trail, surrounded by the usual woodland sounds of chirping birds and small creatures rustling in the underbrush. About an hour into my walk, I stopped by a small stream clearing to take a drink of water. That's when I noticed the stone. Half hidden under fallen leaves and twigs, it was perfectly circular and smooth, more uniform than a typical river stone. Its surface was glassy yet matte, almost like a hockey puck. I picked it up casually, not expecting anything unusual. The moment the stone touched my palm, I felt a faint vibration, a low, strange sensation that seemed to pulse through my hand. Later, hiking with Jason, something entirely different unfolded. Our names began to be whispered around us, soft and intimate, as if someone were leaning in close. But no one was there. We sat frozen, our eyes scanning the tree line, skin prickling with unease. The voices were strange, not distant or strained, but seemingly right beside us. Yet there was nothing. No movement, no light, just the soft crackling of our campfire. I checked my phone. It was 9:13 p.m., and predictably, no signal. We decided to pack up and hike back, thinking it might be an animal or someone playing a prank. The moment we zipped the tent and stood, the whispering stopped. Our walkout was silent, marked only by our boots crushing dry leaves. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see something following us, but the woods remained still. When we reached the parking area, we both exhaled, releasing tension we hadn't realized we'd been holding. Elena laughed nervously. "That was something," she said. I agreed, but my mind was stuck on those whispers. They didn't sound like an echo or wind. The entire journey home, an unsettling feeling lingered, like we'd been watched by something unseen. It wasn't just hearing our names. It was how the forest had changed, how silence had swallowed every sound. I'm not sure I'll return to that spot soon, but at night, when I close my eyes, those whispers return, faint enough to make me question whether it was real or just a trick of memory. A quiet buzz thrummed through my skin, so subtle I almost missed it. The stone in my hand emitted a barely audible hum that felt more like a sensation than a sound. When I tilted it near my ear, the sound became slightly clearer, steady and soft, almost soothing. The trail was empty. Puzzled but intrigued, I slipped the stone into my jacket pocket and continued walking. A hushed vibration seemed to emanate from it for the next half hour. Each time I reached into my pocket, I could feel its presence, though I couldn't determine if the sensation was real or imagined. Something felt off. The trail seemed different, the trees denser, the path less defined. I'd passed a trail junction marker earlier than expected. I wasn't lost, but something had changed. My phone showed a weak signal, typical for these woods. The humming grew stronger, seemingly responsive to my surroundings. I noticed a curious pattern. The hum intensified when I slowed down and faded when I walked faster. It was as if the stone was alive, reacting to my movements in a way I couldn't understand. An unnatural stillness enveloped the forest. No rustling leaves, no chirping birds, no buzzing insects, just a breath-holding silence. Branches seemed thicker, more imposing. The stone vibrated steadily through my fingers, and something about the moment felt deeply unsettling. When I stepped toward a bend where sunlight peeked through the branches, the humming stopped abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Experimenting, I discovered an invisible boundary. Moving forward past a certain point made the stone go completely silent. Stepping back brought the low, steady hum rushing back. The trail ahead led into darker, denser trees. A subtle pressure from the stone seemed to urge me not to proceed. Unease crept over me. After a moment of deliberation, I turned back toward the clearing where I'd originally found the stone. As soon as I crossed that invisible line, the humming resumed. I tucked the stone into my pocket and walked quickly. The forest felt different now. Shadows lingered unnaturally, and an overwhelming sensation of being watched followed me. I made it back to the parking lot just before dusk, my mind racing with unanswered questions. I was out doing my usual field check just past midnight on a late spring night. The pasture was bathed in pale moonlight, clear and cold. Something was immediately wrong. The sheep weren't grazing or wandering as they normally would. Instead, they stood frozen in an unnaturally tight circle, their heads raised and eyes fixed on a single point in the sky. At first, I thought exhaustion might be playing tricks on me. But no, they were definitely focused on something unusual. A black shape hung against the moonlight, unlike anything I'd seen before. It wasn't reflective or shining, but seemed to absorb light like a hole torn in the sky. Looking closer, I saw a big, roughly rectangular form with blurry edges that shifted in ways I couldn't quite define. My skin prickled with a cold, static-like sensation. A faint, low hum hung in the air, not like wind, but something entirely different. The sheep remained perfectly motionless. When I tried to call out, my voice sounded strange and muffled in the open field. A light pressure built in my head, like gentle fingers pressing against my temples. For a moment, the shape seemed to fold or split, though when I blinked, it returned to a flat, dark mass, blocking the stars. No light passed through it, and the moonlight stopped abruptly at its edges. I wanted to move closer, but my legs felt stiff. The silent boundary seemed to whisper a warning. Something had changed. I knew I would never finish that hike. The night held its breath, and so did I. Part of me wanted to retreat to the house, but another part remained frozen, transfixed by this silent presence that felt completely out of place. The wind had gone completely still. No crickets chirped, no distant dogs barked, no leaves rustled, just a deep, unnerving silence. My pace quickened with an inexplicable sense of urgency. Later attempts to research the stone I found yielded nothing. No local legends, no geological matches. It sits in a box on my shelf now, silent and mysterious. The stone no longer hums, but I know what happened that night was real. Something extraordinary occurred, something I cannot explain. A hush settled over the farm as I noticed something strange. My phone died the moment I tried to snap a picture, its screen going black while the flashlight refused to work despite being fully charged earlier. Looking back, I saw the sheep standing eerily still, their eyes fixed upward. The house felt unnaturally cold. Through the window, a black sheep absorbed moonlight, seemingly swallowing a section of the sky. Suddenly, the entire flock scattered, bolting toward the barn as if startled by something unseen. I rushed outside to investigate, but whatever had alarmed them had vanished. The field lay undisturbed, just damp grass and untouched soil. Over the next few days, I watched the nighttime field closely. The sheep would huddle together, staring skyward in an unnatural silence. They seemed to be waiting for something beyond my understanding. When I shared this experience with neighbors, they laughed it off as a dream or joke. The local vet suggested animals might sense unusual weather, but the sky was clear and conditions normal. I couldn't explain what I'd witnessed. It wasn't a cloud, drone, or plane, nothing I'd ever encountered before. This mysterious shape simply sat there, absorbing moonlight, watching us while the sheep stared as if they knew something I didn't. Since that night, I found myself constantly scanning the evening sky. I haven't seen anything similar again, but sometimes, when the sheep fall silent in the middle of the night, I can't help but look out the window, wondering if that dark presence might return. My flight that day seemed routine. Just another work trip, dropping off paperwork in Las Vegas before heading back to Reno. I was cruising at 7,500 feet in my Cessna 182, southwest from Groom Lake. The autopilot was engaged, instruments steady, and the radio hummed with occasional check-ins from flight control. About 40 minutes into the flight, something unusual caught my eye on the right wingtip. At first, I thought it was a reflection. The sun hitting the wing at a sharp angle could create misleading glares, but this was no typical optical illusion. What I saw was something entirely different. A strange object caught my eye near the wing during my usual flight route. Roughly the size of a small car, it hovered about 100 feet off my right wing. Its surface was completely smooth, like a polished metal sheet that perfectly mirrored the sky and my wing beneath it. I leaned forward, adjusting my sunglasses for a closer look. No visible edges or seams were apparent, just an uncanny reflective surface. My instruments showed everything was normal. Altimeter steady, airspeed consistent, no unexpected turbulence. My heart raced, not from fear, but pure surprise. Reaching for the radio, I tried to contact anyone who might have spotted something similar. Silence. No chatter, no traffic reports. I switched to the transponder using code 1200 for visual flight, but the radar showed nothing, no blips anywhere near me. I pulled back the throttle slightly and watched the object maintain its exact position at my wingtip. It didn't move or flicker, instead staying perfectly positioned and matching my speed and heading as if locked in place. When I turned the plane slightly left to test its response, it mirrored my moves with flawless precision. I grabbed my phone, hoping to film through the side window, but the reflection and plane speed made the image just a blur of sky. The object hovered silently beside me, no engine noise, no lights, no vibrations, just this smooth, mirror-like shape. My mind raced through possible explanations. Too large and smooth to be a drone without visible engines, not like a weather balloon which doesn't hover or match speed so precisely. The sky was crystal clear, and the object incredibly well-defined. For several minutes, it remained motionless. Then, after about 7 minutes, it slowly pulled away from my wingtip. It shimmered briefly and vanished into the distance as if it had never existed. In all my years of flying, I'd never encountered anything like this. I was flying over Montana when something caught my eye. It was so distinct, yet impossible to explain. My instruments and plane felt completely normal. No warning lights, no system faults. After landing in Las Vegas, I dove into investigating. The FAA traffic log showed nothing unusual, and the tower controller confirmed no reported incidents. Most of my crew dismissed the encounter as a trick of light or an overactive imagination, but something kept bothering me. How clear and solid it had looked, how the compasses and instruments remained unaffected. Days later, driving home, a subtle hum emerged from my car's stereo system, not from the speakers, but underneath. When I switched everything off, the sound vanished. I repeatedly checked my flight log and plane instruments. No errors. Yet late at night, when I glance at the wingtip, that strange presence returns. Something watching just out of sight. It was the only time I've encountered something so clearly out of place in the sky, yet which left no trace except in my memory. The cold Montana morning was still. A fresh inch of powder coated everything after a recent cold front. And Carson hail, and these woods are familiar territory. Parking at the edge of a clearing on Forest Road 600 and D11, I dropped my pack and breathed in the sharp pine-scented air. Something felt different from the start. At first light, I found the tracks. A deer's steady walk, 2 front and 2 back hooves, leaving a clear path. Carefully, I followed into the pines, avoiding any noise that might break the morning silence. Overhead, snow-laden branches arched like a canopy, with early sunlight filtering through and illuminating tree trunks like golden lanterns. My watch read 7:12 a.m., and my phone stayed off. In cold country, distractions are the last thing you want. Bird songs faded as I moved through a stand of young firs. Suddenly, the forest went completely quiet. No wind, no birds, just the sound of my own breathing. Scanning the landscape, I expected to see a buck or coyote, but nothing moved. A small depression in the snow caught my eye, a shallow bowl, as if something heavy had rested there. I shrugged and continued. The deer tracks led downhill to a frozen creek bed with glazed clear ice. My gaiters snapped against the snow as I followed. They dipped onto the ice, slid forward slightly, then continued without hesitation. I moved carefully through the snow, my footsteps crunching softly. The tracks ahead were clear and purposeful, cutting a straight line across the meadow's center. A deer was pushing hard, likely heading toward open ground and a spring downstream. Climbing the far bank into a wide meadow, I found wind-cowed snow and patches of hard crust among bare grass. Something unusual emerged halfway across the field. A second set of tracks overlapped the deer's, revealing men's hunting boots, size 10, pointing in the same direction. Whoever was following seemed to be trailing, not chasing. Their steps were slow and deliberate, matching the deer's path with an unsettling precision. The silence was absolute. No crows called, no wind stirred. Even the snow beneath my boots seemed muted, as if the air itself was dense and heavy. Ravens had been scavenging near a cluster of rocks, their droppings dotting the white landscape. No fresh pellets or feathers disturbed the empty calm. Almost reflexively, I unzipped my jacket for another layer, despite not feeling cold. Raising my binoculars, I scanned the landscape. Nothing moved, No figures, no disturbance along the tree line. About 80 yards ahead, the tracks simply ended where the ground sloped gently toward a hidden ravine. I crouched and examined the snow closely. No return prints, no boot marks, stumbling down the slope, no disturbed snow crystals. It was like someone had vanished into thin air. The deer's hoof prints merged with the mysterious boot prints at this point, then continued forward into the brush. I stood and tested the snow around the track's end. Firm crust. When I stepped, I sank an inch. Everywhere else gave 2 or 3 inches under my weight. The ground here felt different, colder. Holding my gloved hand an inch above the surface, I felt a sudden draft like a trapped mini blizzard. Unease crept over me. My heart raced, but curiosity held me in place. I searched for any sign. Twig breaks, cloth scraps, nothing. I lifted snow to check the grass underneath. Untouched. Something was wrong. I should have left, but something kept me rooted. I marked the GPS coordinates, 482-91DN, 114.498DDW. The horizon showed only pines to the north, a hill to the south. The world was a blank, white canvas. No cabin lights, no road sounds, pure silence. I tied a cloth strip high on a nearby tree to mark the spot. It snapped sharply in the windless air, the sound cutting through the absolute stillness. The forest that morning was silent, save for the soft rattle of pine needles in the breeze. I'm Carl Jensen, a state wildlife tracker with decades of experience. But nothing could prepare me for what I'd encounter on this particular hunt. Deer tracks curved south, skirting the meadow's edge before disappearing into dense woods. My stomach tightened. Something felt wrong. I'd lost the deer, but returning to the forest alone seemed unthinkable. The open field stretched emptily, as if unseen eyes watched from the tree line. Dread spread slowly, ice creeping under my collar. I shifted my pack and followed the tracks, every sense heightened. The forest awakened around me. Woodpeckers tapped, chickadees chattered overhead. My breath hung visible in the cold air as I snapped a branch, testing my gun zero. Nothing seemed out of place, yet something felt off. The tracks ended too cleanly, too intentionally. No logical explanation made sense. Moving downhill toward the creek, my heart raced faster than I wanted to admit. By 9:10 a.m., I'd been out nearly 2 hours, my legs rubbery from the trek. At the tree line, I dropped my pack on a log. One last look at the meadow revealed nothing. No flags, no footprints, just unbroken white snow. The parking lot remained as empty as when I'd arrived. I tossed my shotgun and pack into the truck, sat down, and closed my eyes. Back home, the heat felt overwhelming. I hung my coat and boots, washed my gloves in the sink. My phone pinged. My wife asking about breakfast. Yes, just give me 15, I replied. Morning light flooded the living room as I stared out the window. Hours passed. I kept glancing outside, half expecting something to appear. But the snow lay untouched. I pulled out my map, studied the GPS point, zooming in on the contour lines. These prints still haunt me. I know the woods can hide countless secrets, animals, people, echoes of forgotten footsteps, but footprints ending in open snow with no return? I've spent my life tracking game, navigating wild places, yet nothing explains that empty feel. Something doesn't add up. The silence was profound, broken only by the idling truck's heater and my own uncertain thoughts. I'm a forestry worker, and that day in Flagstaff, Arizona, something happened that defies explanation. I was working in a closed-off section of ponderosa pines, monitoring tree health and setting up environmental sensors. The morning was cool and crisp, with that sharp mountain air that makes everything feel still and quiet. Around 9 a.m., an unusual sound broke the silence. A low, deep hum filled the air, unlike any machine noise I'd ever heard. It was steady, almost like a distant engine idling, but no equipment was visible. The sound seemed to originate from just beyond a cluster of trees, about 50 yards away. Then I saw it. A smooth, dark shape slipped between the tree trunks. It wasn't an object with definable edges, but a black mass that seemed almost reflective in the scattered sunlight. It moved with an unnatural, fluid grace, gliding silently before disappearing behind a thick stand of pines as quickly as it had appeared. The forest felt different afterward. Bird calls and wind sounds were muted, as if everything was holding its breath. Part of me wanted to investigate, but another part warned me to stay put. I shook off the feeling and continued my work. By lunchtime, I was back at the ranger station. The break room was quiet when a man walked in, someone who definitely didn't look like he belonged. Clean-shaven with short, slicked-back black hair, He wore a uniform with no identifying patches or logos. This wasn't my first strange encounter. That winter, I was staying in a small, converted woodshed behind a farmhouse in northern Vermont, just outside Glover. After everything fell apart in Boston, I needed a cheap, quiet place. Just one room with a cot, a heater, and a desk. My backyard astronomy hobby had been keeping me focused, tracking star fields, meteor showers, and occasional satellite flares. Another afternoon, a man walked in wearing a plain black shirt and pants, an outfit more suited to security personnel or government agents than a forestry office. Without asking, he sat down at my table. When I glanced over expecting something, the moment felt charged with an unexplained tension. I haven't gone back to that spot in the Ponderosa Pines yet. Maybe I will someday. Or maybe some tracks are better left covered, some stories untold. The day started like any other forestry work, but an unexpected encounter left me unsettled. While setting up my equipment on the table, a GPS, handheld weather meter, and various measuring tools, a man approached quietly. He studied my instruments intently, asking probing questions about their calibration and accuracy. His tone was firm yet measured. When I assured him everything seemed fine, he leaned in and cryptically warned about potential consequences of measurement deviations. Before I could seek clarification, he abruptly stood and vanished from the room. The afternoon took an eerie turn. My GPS began showing impossible position shifts, jumping dozens of feet instantaneously. The weather meter started fluctuating wildly, and that faint, deep hum returned from beyond the tree line. On my way back to the truck, I caught another glimpse of a dark shape sitting motionless on a rock, blending into the shadows. The moment our eyes met, it melted into the trees. I kept the encounter to myself, uncertain of what had transpired. Since that day, strange lights have flickered between the pines at night. The low hum persists, even when no equipment is running. Was the man warning me or investigating something I shouldn't have seen? One thing became clear: this forest was far from ordinary. My telescope setup was modest but perfectly positioned. I used 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain, mounted on a Skywatcher, situated on a plywood platform behind my cabin. The location was ideal, far enough from town to escape light pollution, with winter nights offering crystal clear skies. That Tuesday night felt special. I had just received approval to work remotely for a Portland graphic design firm and celebrated with a simple beer and grilled cheese. Around 1:30 a.m., while studying the Orion Nebula, something unusual caught my eye. A northeastern star I knew well suddenly blinked, but this was no ordinary atmospheric distortion. It was a hard, definitive blink. Gone, then back. The pattern was distinctly odd. 3 quick flashes, a long pause, 2 more flashes, then silence. I spent the next hour meticulously tracking the star, checking every possible variable. I swapped eyepieces, verified my power source, and reviewed my notes. Nothing could explain what I'd witnessed. Eventually, I logged the incident and dismissed it as fatigue. Something felt different that night. The snow from earlier had fallen fresh, at least 2 inches deep, yet the ground remained perfectly undisturbed. Around 2 a.m., half dozing at my desk while waiting for cloud cover to clear, I glimpsed movement through the curtain. A tall, extremely thin man stood motionless just beyond the tree line, approximately 30 feet away. His skin appeared almost bluish in the moonlight, dressed in a black overcoat and dark slacks. A black telescope on a matching matte black tripod stood before him, with no visible markings. At first, I wondered if someone from town was playing a prank, but for 10 minutes, he remained completely still, eyes fixed to the eyepiece, unmoving. No adjustments, no note-taking, just intense focus. The police would think I was crazy if I reported this. What would I even say? Before dawn, he remained in the same position. By sunrise, he had vanished without a trace. No tracks, no telescope, no evidence he'd ever been there. 2 days later, a strange discovery appeared. Taped to the observatory window was a piece of black paper, bookmark-sized with a perfect white circle centered precisely. No tape edges, no moisture damage despite the snow. By noon, it had disappeared. No wind, no footprints. The following week brought increasingly odd occurrences. Cabin power flickered continuously, never fully cutting out. My telescope mount began drifting slightly off alignment, resisting every recalibration attempt. One night, I found the scope inexplicably pointed toward the woods, though I hadn't touched it. Then came the whispering. Not voices exactly, but a mechanical hum at such a low frequency, I couldn't determine if it was in the air or inside my head. It only happened at night. My recordings always came out blank. Another night, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow around the cabin, circling, not approaching. I killed the lights and waited. Nothing. That's when sleep became impossible. I moved the telescope inside, locked the window, sealed the blackout panel from within, and started keeping a knife by my side. As a wildlife photographer working mostly freelance, I've spent countless nights capturing nature's subtle moments. One late summer evening, the sky had that distinctive orange-grey light that fellow photographers know can yield incredible shots if you're patient. Near the water's edge, I sat on a fallen log with my camera mounted on a tripod, focusing on a river bend where trees cast long shadows. For about an hour, I photographed birds landing on branches and a beaver gliding through the water. Later, while reviewing my images, something peculiar caught my eye. Dark, irregular shapes floated just beneath the river's surface. Not like typical rocks or logs, but smooth, matte forms almost like shadows, yet more solid. Strangely, these shapes remained unchanged between frames, even as water moved around them. Initially dismissing it as a camera glitch, I deleted the shots. But the next day, I returned to the same spot at the same time, and the shapes reappeared. Zooming in and trying different angles revealed nothing new. They remained constant, just below the surface, unmoving and distinctly odd. When I mentioned this to a friend, he joked about river spirits, but something felt unsettling. This wasn't the first strange occurrence. Months earlier, during a moonless, clear night of stargazing with my telescope, the stars had simply vanished. Not obscured, just gone. After 15 to 20 minutes, they reappeared in the exact same positions, as if they'd never disappeared. The morning after that night, I packed everything into my truck and left before sunrise, not even saying goodbye to the farmhouse owners. 2 nights after revisiting the river shapes, I was on my porch editing photos, surrounded by the quiet woods. Crickets chirped softly, punctuated by the river's gentle rush. Suddenly, a car crunched up the gravel driveway. Unexpected given how remote my cabin was, a sound broke the night's silence, signaling something was different. A car was approaching. Its model unfamiliar, and its arrival unusual given the late hour. That was a year ago, and I haven't touched my telescope since. Black suit, no tie, crisp white shirt, and polished shoes. He seemed out of place standing on my porch. Before I could offer any greeting, he spoke. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice wavering. His smile held no genuine warmth. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, pulling out a small notebook. "I'm interested in some photos you've taken." Confusion swept over me. What photos? Without revealing the notebook's contents, he continued, "I believe you have images capturing certain anomalies in the nearby river. I'd like to review your camera's memory card." I stepped back, increasingly uncomfortable. "I don't think that's necessary," he nodded, seemingly deaf to my protest, and swiftly removed the SD card from my camera. Panic rose as I realized the door was unlocked. "Please put that back," I insisted. Silence hung between us. He turned the card over in his fingers, weighing it thoughtfully. "Water keeps its own secrets," he said quietly. "Sometimes those secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm air. "Who are you?" I asked. After a moment, he replied, "Just someone who wants to help you avoid trouble." The porch light flickered, and the surrounding woods seemed to darken unnaturally. Moving closer, I demanded, "Give that back." Without a word, he returned the card to my camera and handed it over. As quickly as he'd arrived, he got back in his car and drove away. I locked the door and sat down, the camera still warm in my hands. Calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I say? A strange encounter with no clear threat. The next day, I returned to the river, determined to understand the mysterious shapes. The water appeared normal, clear, and slow. But when I looked through my camera's viewfinder, those same shapes emerged, lurking just beneath the surface. I captured more images and later that night examined them closely on my laptop. As I zoomed in, the details became increasingly unsettling. It was late October, a Thursday, and I was driving home from work through the outskirts of New Richmond, Wisconsin. The sky was mostly clear, but there was a cool, damp feeling in the air, like the kind of chill that clings to your skin when the sun's just dipped below the horizon. The road was quiet that evening, just past 7 p.m., with darkness creeping along the horizon near the local power plant. I'd driven this route countless times before, but something felt different. Lights flickered oddly over the facility, not the standard work lights or warning beacons, but smaller, brighter points arranged in an inexplicable pattern. They moved methodically, almost like they were scanning or surveying the area. I pulled over, watching these strange formations. Shadows seemed to shift between the trees, always darting away before I could fully focus. My phone would mysteriously die when I attempted to call or text. The river nearby emitted an unusual low-humming vibration, particularly at dusk, right where I'd been taking photographs. The water held something beneath its surface, shapes that looked solid yet dark, without reflection or texture. These forms lingered in my photos, just below the surface, like silent watchers. A man in black had warned me about disturbing certain things, and his words echoed in my mind. Water keeps its own secrets. I didn't share much about these experiences, save for a few friends who dismissed my observations as stress-induced imagination. But I knew something fundamental had changed. When the wind was still and the river moved quietly, I could sense something watching from the trees. Yet whenever I turned to look, only shadows remained. I'm writing this because someone needs to know. Perhaps there are entities paying attention to the quiet, forgotten places. Some secrets might be alive, resisting discovery. The atmosphere that night was charged with a strange mix of familiar and unfamiliar scents, ozone, burning coal, and an odd metallic sharpness. I haven't returned to the river after dark since that night. Whatever is there, it's definitely not natural. The lights moved in a deliberate pattern around the plant's perimeter, almost like a coded message. I was heading home from work when I noticed them hovering over the northern cooling towers around 7:10. They stayed for maybe 5 minutes before disappearing behind a cooling tower. My phone started acting strange when I tried to take a picture. The screen glitched and flickered, so I put it away. Suddenly, a car pulled up behind me, engine quiet, with no headlights. A man in his mid-40s appeared in the rolled-down window, clean-shaven, with slick-back black hair and a dark suit that seemed out of place. He greeted me with a professional, measured voice. "Evening," he said. "Do you work at the power plant?" I asked. "No, just passing through." "I work downtown on Main Street," he replied with a nod. Another car arrived, and a second man stepped out. Similar build, black suit, pale skin, looking like he never saw daylight. The first man leaned closer, asking exactly what time I saw the lights. When I confirmed the details, the second man stepped forward, hands folded calmly. "Did you see any workers, maintenance crews?" he asked. "No," I responded. It was completely quiet, just those lights. A heavy silence hung between us. Something wasn't right. The first man asked to see my phone, but I refused. He didn't push, which only made me more nervous. A small badge emerged from his jacket. Not quite a police badge, more like a government ID. The details were blurred in the dim light. "We understand it's important that no one else talks about this," the second man said slowly. "The company was already aware and handling the situation. Thank you for your cooperation," the first man said flatly, "and your discretion." They drove away in cars without visible license plates. The second car pulled ahead and vanished first, followed by the first. The road fell silent again, and I sat there, unsettled by the feeling of being watched in a way that made my skin crawl. Those lights weren't normal, not by a long shot. This was the first time I'd seen something odd near the power plant, and 2 men had approached me, making it clear they wanted absolute silence about whatever had occurred. When I told Mark about it later, I worked the late shift at the old radio tower on the edge of Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York. Early November had settled in with a cold fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. The tower wasn't much, just a rusty metal structure with a cramped room at the top, where I managed local emergency broadcasts for nearby communities. That night started like any other. I arrived around 9 p.m., grabbed my jacket, and climbed the spiral staircase to the broadcast room. Fog had thickened since dusk, and the windows were already streaked with condensation. Absolute silence surrounded me, broken only by the soft hum of equipment and occasional beeps from the transmitter. Around midnight, while doing routine checks, the radio began to crackle with static. At first it seemed normal, just interference from weather or a weak, distant signal. But then the static grew louder, as if someone was forcefully pushing through with their own signal. It wasn't a recognizable code or message, just a low, drawn-out hiss that felt wrong. Strange occurrences started piling up after that night. My phone began acting weird, dropping calls and messages without explanation. When I mentioned the encounter to others, they were naturally skeptical. Probably just government agents or company security making sure I don't spread rumors, they suggested. But something didn't feel right. Once, driving past the plant in daylight, I spotted a black SUV near the gate. windows tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. No one was inside. Nights became increasingly unsettling. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window. When I looked, nothing was there, but the street light flickered oddly, and that metallic smell returned. I started taking a longer route home, adding 20 minutes to my commute just to avoid that stretch of road. Weeks passed quietly until one late evening at the office. Nearly 10 p.m. the building was empty except for me. I glanced out the window and glimpsed a dark figure in the street lamp shadows. But when I looked again, nothing remained. I can't shake the memory of those lights, those men, and that mysterious badge I never fully saw. Something larger seems to be happening. Something I'm not meant to understand. The control room was thick with fog and static filling every corner. My first instinct was to reach for the radio, maybe call out, but the static rose up, cutting off my voice in a harsh burst. It wasn't just interference. The radio itself felt like it was warning me, drowning my words with an overwhelming hiss. Heart pounding, I pulled back from the microphone and looked up. That's when I saw him. Outside the window, just past the fog, stood a man on the metal catwalk surrounding the tower. He was dressed entirely in black, not work gear or a casual jacket, but a formal suit and tie. His hair was slicked back, his face pale and unnaturally smooth in the dim light. He didn't move like a normal person. Instead, he stood almost statuesque, with one exception. His hand raised, palm facing me in a clear gesture to stop what I was doing. I watched him for a moment longer. Then, as quickly as he appeared, the man turned and stepped off the catwalk into the fog. The mist swallowed him completely. For a long time, I sat listening to the static, the silence, the faint hum of the tower's machinery. The radio never fully cleared up. When the morning shift arrived, I shared what happened. The static, the mysterious figure. No one believed me. They suggested fatigue or fog-induced hallucinations. But this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, strange things started. My phone began acting odd. Calls wouldn't connect. Texts sent themselves blank. Sometimes the screen would flicker with static, even when powered off. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling watched, whether outside or driving home in the darkness. Now, I know about this experience, but I also recognize I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange that night. Sometimes I drive past the plant, but I never stop. And I've never mentioned what I saw to anyone else. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35, living in Portland, but always drawn to Oregon's remote places. A planned weekend hike had brought me to a forgotten trail near an old Cold War radar station in the Cascades. Late October had turned cold and damp, perfect for escaping city noise and deadlines. The landscape was mostly ruins when I set up camp just past the tree line where the radar installation once stood. Concrete foundations and rusted antenna pieces were the only reminders of what used to be. Around 7 p.m., a strange sound caught my attention. A low, deep hum unlike any engine or animal noise. It was a constant vibration that seemed to pulse through ground and air simultaneously. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the tree line's edge. That's when I saw them. Small, pale, bluish orbs gliding quietly beneath the trees. They flickered faintly, moving slowly in the shadows. I squinted into the dense forest, struggling to count them or understand their origin. They didn't resemble people or any animals I knew. Later, the static on my radio worsened. Broadcasts would cut in out, and sometimes, just before signing off, faint whispers seemed to drift through. Though I couldn't make out clear words, something made me pause. Earlier that day, parking my car in the tower's lot, I'd noticed a black sedan near the wood's edge. It was different, too clean, too polished. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, moving with calm purpose. One looked directly at me and gave a small nod. "You need to be careful what you say," one said quietly. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Before I could respond, they got back into the car and drove away, leaving me standing in the cold, uncertain. The man I'd seen outside the window and his cryptic warning lingered in my mind. I never saw him or the 2 men again, but their presence remained. Each time I climbed the tower, an unsettling sensation of being watched took hold, as if the fog itself was anticipating something. Eventually the static faded and broadcasts normalized, yet the feeling persisted. Now, on certain nights when the wind is just right and thick fog rolls in, I swear I can hear that same soft, steady hum. The Adirondacks in early fall can be deceptively quiet. Hiking through Panther Gorge, a remote trail promising solitude, I was hoping to enjoy one last day outdoors before winter set in. The sky hung low and grey, casting a muted light across the landscape. About midway through my loop, I entered a narrow section where the trees grew dense and the path shrank to little more than a dirt track. Something felt off immediately. The usual forest sounds vanished. No birds, no rustling leaves, just absolute silence. I stopped, listening intently. Then a flash caught my eye, brighter than a lightning bug, sharper than a camera's click. The forest seemed heavier, the air thicker. Back at my small rented cabin about 10 miles from the trailhead, I started noticing something odd. Every single night, precisely on the hour, a black sedan would drive past without any headlights. The first time I thought it might be a mistake or a technical issue. I even tried to flag it down with my flashlight, but the car showed no response. No brake lights, no signals, just a steady, unchanging pace. This continued for 3 consecutive nights. Each time the car would pass by my cabin at exactly the same time, moving at the same speed, always in complete darkness. The entire scenario felt surreal, like something from a strange movie. I checked for potential explanations, power outages, road issues, but everything else around seemed completely normal. Curious and slightly unnerved, I mentioned this to a local at a diner in town. His response was cryptic. When I described the car's behavior, no lights, precise timing, he just shrugged and said, "Around here, some folks keep an eye on that place. You never know." He didn't seem interested in elaborating. That same night, after the car's routine pass, I heard it again, that faint, distant hum. Standing by the window, I scanned the dark forest beyond the road, but saw nothing. The next day, I returned to the site during daylight, hoping to find some answers. But the area looked completely unremarkable. The forest seemed normal enough during my hike, with just the usual sounds of leaves rustling and birds calling in the distance. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary, but something had been nagging at me. A low hum creeping back through the radio like a warning emerging from somewhere just beyond the trees. The forest trail was eerily quiet as I walked. No leaves crunched under my feet, no birds called out. The silence was so intense that every tiny sound felt magnified. A light flickered briefly just off the trail deep in the woods. I squinted into the shadows but saw nothing. After about 10 minutes, the trail opened into a small clearing near the road leading back to the parking area. The sun was starting to dip lower, and I was eager to finish my hike before darkness fell. That's when I noticed the car. A plain black sedan sat on the side of the road, engine running but without lights. The driver's window was down, revealing a man who looked completely ordinary. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, dark hair slicked back, wearing a black suit with an open white collar. He looked directly at me, his expression calm and unreadable. He asked in a low, clear voice. I mumbled that I was just finishing my hike, my voice sounding strange in the stillness. "The forest keeps its secrets. Respect them," he said. Something about his tone suggested this wasn't just a casual comment. When I returned to my campsite, something immediately struck me as odd. Several concrete slabs appeared freshly cracked, as if something substantial had recently pressed down on them. I photographed the damage, puzzled by what could have caused it. I scanned for those strange lights, but saw nothing definitive. That night, an increasing sense of being watched prompted me to double-check every lock on the cabin's doors and windows. Just after midnight, a familiar low hum returned, more intense than before. It vibrated through the walls and floor, steady and unnerving. Looking outside, I spotted the black car again. This time, it was parked across the street, engine off, lights extinguished. I watched, heart racing, as a dark-clothed figure emerged, standing perfectly still for a minute before returning to the vehicle. The car then drove away, still without lights. Sleep became impossible. The next morning, I packed quickly and left, trying to rationalize the experience as a local prank or some odd surveillance. Yet, the memories lingered. The mysterious hum, the lights beneath the trees, the silent car. Weeks have passed and I haven't returned to that area. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I can't explain what happened, but I know what I experienced was real. The uncertainty haunts me still. I've worked plenty of odd jobs, but the night janitor position at a restricted Air Force site in Nevada from 2004 to 2006 was different. Not because of paperwork or signed agreements, but because people get strange when you discuss certain places. They assume you're either fabricating stories or losing your mind. I wasn't. I was simply there to clean floors. The job came through a private contractor who was incredibly selective. Background checks, polygraphs, and a rigorous security orientation were standard. Every week, we'd fly in and out of a small civilian airfield near Tanapa, staying on base for 4 nights. No phones, no cameras, nothing that could transmit a signal. Most buildings appeared completely ordinary. Offices, labs, hangars with boring concrete walls and metal surfaces, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. One building always stood out, Hangar 4C, a squat, left square structure built into red rock, windowless with a single east side door. Not exactly secret, just overlooked. An older janitor named Lewis had given me crucial advice early on. Don't stare at 4C, don't ask about it, don't go near it. I thought he was joking until he added, it hums. During my 3rd month, working late one night behind the admin building, everything was eerily silent. No wind, no aircraft, nothing. Then I heard it, a faint, deep, mechanical hum rising through the ground, like a power transformer under strain. Years later, this forest encounter would seem almost ordinary by comparison. Something about that moment didn't feel natural, but I wasn't sure I wanted to understand what had happened. I stood watching, feeling the cold creep in, after a mysterious car had turned onto the road and disappeared around a bend. The strange silence remained with me even after I reached my car. Not everything is meant to be understood. Sometimes the best thing is to walk away. The base felt different that night. Working a routine shift counting supplies in a detached storage unit near 4C, everything seemed normal until the humming started. Louder than ever before, metal shelving rattled as overhead lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Weak emergency exit signs barely provided light. Weeks earlier, Lewis had warned me, "Don't linger near 4C, he'd said. Some things in there have been running longer than this base has existed. Some things aren't ours." I'd thought he meant old tech, experimental engines. But something about how he spoke stuck with me. I followed the strange vibration that seemed to tickle my ears. It grew more pronounced toward the complex's rockier back end. Passing 2 silent hangars, I approached 4C. No external lights, no vents, no wires, just solid matte black steel. The humming wasn't louder, but denser. I could feel it in my ankles. Standing 10 feet from the door, I noticed my breath fogging despite the warm mid-70s night. The air system went silent. That hum was all I could hear. When I stepped outside, the sky looked wrong. Orion was twisted as if someone had mirrored the constellation. Weeks earlier, I'd seen another strange incident. A new hire stood near 4C at 2 a.m., hands pressed against the wall, seemingly listening. When I called out, he didn't respond. I had to tap his shoulder to break his trance. He looked pale, confused. The next week, he was gone. Just another unexplained reassignment. Walking back to the main path, I tried to stay calm. No alarms, no announcements, just silence and that deep, persistent hum. As I passed 4C, a new sound emerged. Breathing, not my own. Slow, steady inhalations, like something massive was drawing breath just beyond my perception. The area around the building always felt cold. My fingers would tingle near its doorless entrance. Just a card reader with a keypad. I'd learned to keep my distance, aware of the cameras watching from every angle. I never told anyone about what I'd experienced, not even Lewis. But that night, everything changed. I used to work as an air traffic controller at a small FAA center on the Oregon coast near Newport back in 2009. At 29, I was 4 years into the job. Night shifts were my routine. The air traffic control center was minimal, just a main radar room, communications console, and a few workstations. Things were usually quiet, with mostly cargo flights and occasional medical evacuations to Portland. That particular night, only Dan Holloway and I were on duty. Dan was a 20-year veteran who rarely spoke unless something required attention. We weren't close, but I trusted him. He was direct. He either knew something or said nothing. Just after 2 a.m., the night was clear. Only a UPS flight heading south and a corporate jet near Boise appeared on the scope. I was sipping gas station coffee and working on a crossword when a strange blip appeared in the top right corner of the radar, over open water. The return was tagged at 80,000 feet with no transponder. This wasn't entirely unusual. Military flights sometimes run without identifying signals. But this wasn't in any scheduled military corridors. Dan saw it too, raising his eyebrows silently. The air felt unnaturally cold. I left immediately, retreating to the janitor's brake trailer and sitting in darkness until the lights returned about 20 minutes later. The next morning, no one mentioned the incident. When I asked Lewis about it, he cryptically said, "You stayed out too long." Months later, I was reassigned to Facility 7B. I didn't argue. It was farther from the ridge. I never saw 4C again. During my final debriefing in a windowless white room, a nameless official told me, "You'll sign this and never talk about what you saw." I signed, though I hadn't truly seen anything, just heard a low hum from beneath the world and felt a cold that lingered on my skin. The radar had shown something impossible, a signal at 80,000 feet that dropped to sea level in less than a second. No gradual descent, just a complete vanish. That building likely remains locked, silent, still humming. The radar sweep caught my attention. Something was different about this ghost return. Weather interference typically fragments signals, but this one held steady. Dan leaned in silent. I nodded in agreement. Suddenly, the return vanished completely, not off the screen's edge, but blinking out mid-grid, as if someone flipped a switch. No trail, no gradual descent, nothing. I pulled up the raw radar playback, hoping for a system glitch explanation. The raw return was precise. High altitude appearance, reef hold, then an instant drop to sea level before disappearing entirely. A system diagnostic showed everything normal. No errors, no drop pings. Against protocol, I printed the hard copy logs. Something felt off. Dan remained quiet. Around 2 a.m., 2 unidentified men arrived. No uniforms, no recognizable vehicle. They entered through the side entrance with badge access, claiming to be contract IT support from Seattle. One went directly to the radar terminal, while the other requested system logs from Dan. When I asked who called them, Dan simply said, "Not us." They stayed until just after 5 a.m. Upon leaving, the system had been completely rebooted. Hard drives were purged. Every radar sweep from 1 to 4 a.m. was overwritten. My printed logs vanished. Dan and I exchanged a look. He cut off my attempt to speak. "Don't," he said. "We finished the shift normally. Logged a quiet night, no incidents." A week later, the manager called me in for a standard review, asked if I remembered anything strange. I replied, "No, just a quiet night." They smiled. "Thought so." We were road tripping from Phoenix to Reno, hitting ghost towns, planning to hike Zion, maybe gamble for a night. Rachel was just another stopover, a tiny blip on the map we'd barely registered. The Moonlight Motor Inn sat like an old trailer from the 70s. 6 rooms facing a cracked lot surrounded by endless desert. A dusty diner across the road looked frozen in 1982. We rolled in around 6:30 just before sunset. The front desk guy, older with a white beard, name tag reading Randy, handed us an actual key on a blue plastic tag. When I mentioned we were heading to Reno, he nodded like we'd announced some impossible journey. "You kids staying just one night? That's smart," he said, then paused and looked out the window. "Don't go wandering after dark," he added. I chuckled, assuming he meant coyotes or snakes. Megan didn't even hear him. We dropped our backpacks in a surprisingly clean motel room. Stained carpet, but fresh sheets. A small table, bulky TV, and a humming mini-fridge greeted us. Outside, the desert sky transformed into a brilliant orange as we walked to the diner. The place was typical: basic burgers, fries, and watery coffee. 2 truckers played cards in the back while Patty Klein echoed from the jukebox. A waitress offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a look suggesting she'd heard every possible story 1,000 times. Around 8:15, we were back at the motel, cracking open beers and sitting on the curb. The night cooled yet remained warm. Stars emerged with impossible clarity. I'm not usually one for scenery, but this sky was different. Something special. Megan knew her constellations, tracing them while I watched satellites drift overhead. Around 9 p.m., a bright white light caught her attention. Low on the southern horizon, it hung motionless. I initially thought it was an aircraft from nearby Groom Lake, but something felt strange. It remained perfectly still, defying the movement of surrounding objects. A star, Megan suggested, but its position and lack of twinkling contradicted that theory. Suddenly, the light began rising, not like a typical aircraft, but straight up with an unnatural, controlled speed. We stood, watching intently. Then came the moment that still haunts me. In an instant, the single white dot split into 2 lights, positioned side by side. No dramatic transition, just a sudden separation. They hovered briefly before vanishing completely. Not fading, not flying away, just disappearing as if a switch had been flipped. No sound, no trace. We waited, hoping for an explanation, but the sky returned to its starry stillness. When we looked at each other, no words were necessary. Something extraordinary had occurred. Back in the motel room, an unsettling quiet descended. I locked the door, something I never do, and turned on the TV, seeking comfort. Only static greeted us, the screen flickering before turning an eerie blue. The silence was deafening. Dan would transfer to Phoenix months later. I left the FAA the following year. I've never seen anything like that night again. Nothing even close, but I think about it more than I probably should. We set out near Cinder on an unmarked trail, eager to escape the noise and constant connectivity. Hale Hollow was our destination, a place of quiet and solitude. Our gear was minimal. 1 tent, 2 sleeping bags, a jet boil, trail mix, and canned soup. Kayla brought her well-worn camera, its strap fraying, capturing everything from trees to trails to me struggling with the campfire. She'd always loved documenting small moments, despite my gentle teasing. Our first night, we camped beside a shallow creek about 4 miles into our journey. Earlier, the motel room's TV had been acting strange, its signal dropping in and out, so we'd left it on for background light. Around 1 a.m., Megan woke me up, standing by the window. Something's out there. Peering out, I saw only dark desert and faint hill outlines. The security light flickered, nothing unusual. Then, about 100 yards into the scrub, a weird round glow caught my eye. It was like a stationary softball-sized flashlight, perfectly circular, with no spreading light. "It's moving," Megan said, and it was drifting silently just above the ground, gliding left to right in a straight line before stopping. I pulled the curtain closed. We didn't sleep, just sat in the blue TV light, silent. Eventually, the signal returned, a news anchor's voice filling the room. Though I wasn't listening, morning brought normalcy. A pale blue sky, fresh coffee at the diner, truckers still playing cards as if time had stopped. We checked out around 8. Randy was gone. A woman in her 40s at the desk smiled politely, as if our previous interactions had never happened. Pulling out of the lot, I glanced back. Nothing in the sky, nothing in the hills, but the TV signal remained strong and the stars never looked as clear again. We felt utterly alone. Back at our campsite, after dinner we sat by the fire, laughing about being disconnected from our phones. Kayla joked about deleting Instagram, though we both knew she'd never follow through. She loved posting too much. Around 3 a.m., something woke me. The tent fabric seemed to move as if something had brushed against it, but the trees were completely still. When I unzipped the flap to investigate, nothing was there, no animals, just the quiet sound of the creek. Kayla remained zipped in her sleeping bag, facing away. Morning would bring an odd conversation, but for now, we were enveloped in the night's mysterious silence. The morning started eerily quiet. Kayla had mentioned something about whispering during the night, but I hadn't heard a thing. Our hike that day was different from her usual chatter. Instead of her constant stream of facts and stories, she walked ahead silently, capturing images with her camera. Late afternoon brought unexpected dark clouds and sudden rain that drenched us before we could pitch the tent. We quickly set up a makeshift camp under thick pine trees. Kayla's camera fogged up, and she muttered that something felt strange about our location. That night, a bizarre experience unfolded. A bright white light hung motionless outside the tent, unlike any flashlight I'd seen. I found myself paralyzed, unable to move or call out. Something seemed to hover just inches away behind the tent fabric. The air grew impossibly heavy. Then everything went dark. When I awakened, sunlight filled the tent. Kayla was nowhere to be found. Her camera remained, which was unusual since she never went anywhere without it. Her boots were missing, so I initially assumed she'd gone for a quick walk. Hours passed with no sign of her. I circled the campsite, calling her name, growing increasingly desperate. By noon, I was shouting. I climbed a rock ridge, spinning and scanning the forest. No footprints marked the soft dirt. Panic consumed me. Around 2 p.m., I left everything behind and drove until I found cell service. I called 911, and search and rescue was dispatched by nightfall. A deputy made me wait at the ranger station while the first team went up. They discovered our campsite the next morning, my tent, our food, her sleeping bag, but no trace of Kayla. Then things got strange. They requested photos of her, but when I tried to show them, something was wrong. I scrolled through my entire gallery from the past year. Not a single picture of Kayla existed. Not from the campsite, not from our road trip, not even from the grocery store the day before we left. None of it made any sense. My work took me to a remote botany field lab in central Utah, a solitary station nestled in a narrow gulch south of the San Rafael swell. Just me, a generator, endless sandstone, and sagebrush. stretching to the horizon. The tiny living quarters and attached greenhouse were designed for one person, and my days were quiet, cataloging genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. That week's landscape held its bee wreath, but something was unraveling. I first noticed it at the gas station. A photo where Kayla was once standing was now just me in the frame. I told the deputy it had to be a glitch, maybe a phone corruption or cloud backup failure. He nodded, unconvinced. They asked for her details. Kayla Darnell. I spelled out her name, provided her birthday, workplace, everything I knew. When they ran the information, they reported no record of anyone by that name in Oregon. I thought perhaps they'd misspelled something. I pulled up my texts to show them our messages. Nothing. Not a single conversation. I scrolled through months of communication blank. My contacts showed no saved number, and the call log had no history of our interactions, despite confirming our trip just 3 days earlier. I gave them her number anyway. They dialed. Disconnected. Back in my apartment, I checked social media. Kayla vanished completely. No tags, comments, or likes. We'd been friends for almost 3 years, meeting at a film festival in Bend. She'd introduced me to half my network and posted countless hiking pictures. Now, nothing remained, not even her profile. I checked mutual friends. No one recognized her name. I called old co-workers. A guy she once dated. Her tent still stood at home. 2 sleeping bags inside. The blue one bore her name in Sharpie. K. Darnell. Clear as day. Strange how memories persist when everything else fades. She once called ferns forest squid. Now that's all I think about when I see them. She lives in my head while the world pretends she never existed. I marked a waypoint on my GPS and hiked back out quickly. At dusk, I reached the trailhead. Last winter disappeared along with Kayla's memory. At the coffee spot, I asked about her. Dark blonde hair, denim jacket with patches. The barista didn't recognize her name. Same story at the art supply store where she used to work weekends. Tuesday morning changed everything. The 6 custom soil sensors I'd rigged with an Arduino array normally sent data to my laptop every 10 minutes. End quote. But that morning revealed a strange 5-hour blank spot between midnight and 5 a.m. The system had flatlined and then resumed, as if nothing unusual had occurred. I meticulously checked everything. Wi-Fi was fine. The generator ran smoothly. Later, in the greenhouse, I discovered an LED grow light with a half-melted, warped plastic casing. It looked like someone had taken a blowtorch to its edge, which seemed impossible given its distance from any heat source. I'd previously dismissed the greenhouse sensor's quirks as electrical anomalies. The night sensor alarm had blared at 2 a.m. with 3 sharp beeps, signaling a dangerous pH drop below 4.0, completely abnormal for this soil. Boots on and flashlight in hand, I stepped outside. The air carried an odd scent, not quite smoke, but like burned dust and scorched minerals, reminiscent of a lightning strike on rocky ground. When I opened the greenhouse door, humidity rushed out, which made no sense. I hadn't watered anything, and it hadn't rained in days. The glass was completely fogged over. Inside, something was profoundly wrong. Every single plant had turned, not fallen or dragged, but precisely rotated, all facing inward toward a bare meter-wide patch of soil I'd kept open for new specimens. The ground looked undisturbed, yet strangely compressed, a smooth, even circle as if something had been resting there. No prints, no marks. Above this spot, the glass ceiling bore a faint black scorch mark, spreading outward in a ring about a foot across. Spider-web-like cracks radiated from the center, and the metal framing seemed subtly warped with a strange heat distortion. I backed out and locked the door. The next morning, I checked the time-lapse camera. The footage ran normally until 12:47 a.m., when it suddenly glitched. One frame showed static, then black, then white. The timestamp jumped forward 4 hours. When I reviewed the raw image files, I discovered a troubling pattern. Every file between 1247 and 451 was corrupted and unreadable, nothing more than digital noise. Running a recovery program revealed 437 fragments of something unexplained. The day started with no breeze, no clouds, the air thick and stale, insects scarce. Heat lingered differently even after dark. Something had happened, but I couldn't explain what. Thursday night I decided to keep watch in the greenhouse with a flashlight, unsure what I might witness. While reviewing camera files earlier, I'd noticed something odd. Most thumbnails were just garbage data fragments, but a few caught my eye. Brief violet and pale green flashes, like sudden bursts of light, One blurry image showed a smooth metallic curve in the top right corner with no identifying features. I deleted the corrupted files and switched off the camera when the plant started behaving strangely. Gallium leaves curled inward, as if enclosing something invisible. Two wild barley pots bent their stems at sharp 90° angles toward a central bare spot, maintaining that position even after I rotated them. Each morning, I'd find the fern I'd moved back to the bench's edge, tipped over and facing the center again. Around 1:30, something extraordinary happened. The temperature dropped rapidly from 77 to 61°C in under 5 minutes, confined only to the greenhouse. The air felt electrified. My arm hair stood on end. LED lights flickered and then shut off completely. An eerie silence followed. Total stillness. No generator hum, no wind, not even distant insect sounds. I'm uncertain how long this lasted. Maybe 2 minutes, perhaps 10. When I switched my flashlight back on, the central bare spot looked darker, as if wet, though no rain had fallen. The plants were slightly tilted again. The next morning revealed more oddities. All 6 soil sensors were burnt out. Plastic casings had bubbled, wires melted into the dirt. Strangely, my laptop remained untouched and nothing else in the greenhouse showed damage. I radioed in, citing a hardware malfunction as my reason for cutting the trip short. They didn't probe further. Before leaving, I collected a small soil sample from the central patch, sealing it in a jar that now sits on a shelf in my apartment. Over the following days, the sample dried out completely. The glass has changed over time. Its deep red is now fading to a muted gray. A thin, almost imperceptible ring traces the inner edge where the soil seems to have been nudged away from the center, leaving behind a ghostly residue. Occasionally, when I pass by, a fleeting scent catches me. That familiar burnt dust smell that vanishes almost as quickly as it appears. I apologize, but you haven't provided the original text to be rewritten. Could you please share the text you would like me to restructure?